The material contained in the Diverging Clear Podcast is for informational purposes only. The ideas and opinions expressed in the podcast does not represent the views or missions of the National Rail Passenger Corporation or Amtrak or the Washington Metro Rail Safety Commission. This is the Diverging Clear Podcast.
Approach diverging, milepost 20.04. Diverging clear, milepost 20.06. Welcome to Diverging Clear, your transportation podcast, with your hosts William Moore and Jermaine Walker.
Welcome to the Diverging Clear Podcast, Episode 9. As the railroads merge, I'm your host, William Moore, and I'd first like to say thank you for tuning in. And also don't forget to click the like and subscribe button for this podcast on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, Google Play, Anchor, and any other platform that you listen to or watch your favorite podcast. So let's get down to business. Why does the title of this episode sound like a familiar soap opera, As the World Turns? Well, because the drama surrounding the CP-KCS merger has all the makings of an engagement between Erica Kane and Jackson Montgomery on All My Children. Yes, I'm showing my age, and anyone younger than 30 probably won't catch the reference. But the drama associated with this merger is getting soap opera dramatic since the CN dropped a $33 billion counterproposal to the Canadian Pacific's $29 billion offer. But why did CN get into this race? Is there something strategically important that would make for this to work for the CN? Or is this a CN attempt to stymie CP's progress to grow? Let's break down how we got here. First, just want to give you a little bit of a timeline of what's happened here in the past. Started back in March, towards the end of March. So let's begin there. On March 21st, the Canadian Pacific CEO Keith Creel announced a $29 billion deal to acquire the Kansas City Southern and its subsidiary, the Kansas City Southern Mexico subsidiary. On April 1st, 2021, CP and KCS released a statement saying that nearly 260 shippers, other railroads, economic development authorities, and ports that supported the planned merger. Little over 20 days later, on April 22nd, the CN announced it had written to the KCS's board outlining the Canadian Railroad's superior proposal to acquire KCS in a cash and stock transaction valued at $33.7 billion or $325 per share. On April 23rd, 2021, the STB determined the regulatory waiver for merger would apply for this for the Canadian Pacific and the KCS. On April 25th, the Committee of Transportation and Infrastructure, U.S. Representative Peter DeFazio, a Democrat out of Oregon, warned a future wave of rail consolidations after the CN jumped into the KCS pursuit. On May 6, 2021, the STB approved a voting trust for the Canadian Pacific's proposed acquisition of the KCS. The STB has said the voting trust agreement between Canadian Pacific and KCS is warranted. So now this is where the drama, well, I ain't gonna say where the drama begins, it's where the drama continued. Let me get a couple things together here, make sure I ain't missing nothing, because it's a lot of information here. At this point, it became very contentious between the Canadian Pacific and its Canadian National. Now, at one point here, I'm trying to get all my notes. It was so many of them. The CN went to the started actively courting KCS shareholders of their proposal, and it essentially got the Kansas City Southern to withdraw from the CPS. I'm sorry, I said the CPS, the Canadian Pacific's merger agreement. With that, the CN offered to pay the Kansas City Southern the $700 million termination of contract fee in order to make the entice the board to vote in favor of their merger acquisition or their merger proposal, which was significantly higher by a little over $4 billion higher than the Canadian Pacific's original $29 billion bid. Now, these is a couple of the interesting things here. Shortly following that, the Department of Justice got involved. Anytime you see the DOJ get involved in anything in this regards, that's pretty much a pretty what you would consider a red flag. It's rare that you hear the DOJ speak on transportation issues, at least regarding the railroads. But for them to step up and say something, that kind of show where at least the regulatory bodies of the U.S. was looking at this merger could prove to be very detrimental to the transportation system of America. Now, in another press release, which there have been several thousand of them, it seems like, which is another reason it took me so long to get this episode together. Every time I thought I was done, there was another significant press release, and I had to try to keep you up to date. So as of 5/27, this is the information that I have, because I'm pretty sure several more stories have come out since I began recording this, and at this rate, I would have waited till July, waiting on all the stories to stop funneling through the system to record this episode. But this was in Railway Age magazine. This Surface Transportation Board denied the Canadian Nationals waiver for a voting trust, excuse me, for the acquisition of the Kansas City Southern. The voting trust was denied simply because apparently the CN did not complete the necessary paperwork and didn't contain the necessary information for the voting trust to be approved. It's not to say that it can't be approved in the future, but they did have to go back and reestablish or redo some paperwork to get the proper information on there for the purposes of trying to be okay for a voting trust. Now, According to the Railway Age magazine, it says the STB's decision has significant implications for CN's proposed use of a voting trust. The new merger rules require that the STB formally approve CN's proposed use of a voting trust, though CN had filed a motion seeking such approval. The STB rejected the motion as incomplete. The STB also rejected as misplaced CN arguments about the legal standard governing its consideration of CN's proposed voting trust. Instead, the STB emphasized that the new merger rules take a much more cautious approach to future voting trusts and noted the agency's plenary authority over consolidations. Under the new rules, a voting trust can only be used if, in the context of a particular proposed transaction, its use will be consistent with public interest. The STB's decision made clear that this is a broad standard requiring, at minimum, the consideration of 5 statutory factors. One of those factors relates to the potential of impact of a voting trust on the financial condition of the rail carriers. The STB disagreed with CN's position that there was no cause for concern. The level of debt being utilized by CN to fund the proposed merger, as well as the substantial premium CN has offered for KCS, caused this assumption into question. Also stated that this STB's decision cited DOJ's comment for the statement that threats to competition will be present immediately after a CN voting trust is consummated. So, in I guess to summarize everything, it looks like the grounds for a STB merger approval will be much more tough. It would be a tougher road for the Canadian National, just looking at some of the issues that's emerging. The $4 billion premium that's being paid above what the Canadian Pacific proposed. If you read some of the language and some of the things that the Canadian Pacific has said, that as they said, they were not willing to go above what they had previously offered, and we'll get into the reasons behind that here in just a second. But one of the crucial things that I believe came out from one of the Canadian Nationals' their 6th largest shareholder, which came from TCI Fund Management Limited. And this is what the what TCI had to say in regards to the CN's counterproposal to the Canadian Pacific acquiring the Kansas City Southern. The principals, Sir Chris Hahn and Ben Walker, goes as far as calling the CN's financial commitment negligent and hugely irresponsible. This is in full context of the letter. TCI, through entities it manages, has been a shareholder of Canadian National since 2018 and currently owns more than 20 million shares of the company. TCI is also the largest shareholder of Canadian Pacific. It does not own a position in Kansas City Southern. In light of yesterday's Surface Transportation ruling, we think it is negligent and hugely irresponsible for the CN board to commit $2 billion Canadian dollars of shareholders' money on whether the STB will approve the voting trust for the CN KCS transaction. It is now clear that the CN should abandon its pursuit of KCS unless the merger agreement is amended such that it is not conditional on a voting trust being approved. If the STB ultimately rejects the CN KCS voting trust, CN will have to pay $1 billion in US dollars to reverse the breakup fee to KCS, in addition to covering the $700 million US dollars breakup fee that the KCS would owe to the CP. The STB is sending a clear signal, and the CN board has a duty to listen. The risk that the voting trust is not approved is too great to ignore. In summary, the rules have changed. Therefore, there is no way the CN board can have any confidence in how these new rules will be interpreted because they have never been used before, making what is essentially a $2 billion bet with company money on this one. Unknowable decision would be extremely reckless. Furthermore, further and much more significant, even if the voting trust is granted, there can be no certainty on how the STB will evaluate the new rules when it comes to approving the deal. In this scenario, the CN could be faced with even bigger $18 billion liability if ultimately the transaction is not approved and the trust has to dispose of KCS under potentially distressed conditions. 6 months ago, KCS had a market cap of $16 billion. CN has offered to pay $30 billion. If the deal is not approved by the STB, the CN would be a forced seller of KCS. So it's quite possible that the CN could face a loss of excess of $15 to $18 billion. This would almost wipe out CN's entire shareholder equity that has taken more than 100 years to accumulate. It could also seriously jeopardize the future of the company. In the event that you and the board choose to ignore this recommendation and sign a merger agreement in its current form, but the voting trust is not approved, resulting in a loss to $2 billion, we would expect the immediate resignation of you and the CEO. So that was coming from TCI, the sixth largest shareholder of the Canadian National and the largest shareholder of Canadian Pacific. From the sound of things, they don't see the value in the Canadian National offering the $33 billion for KCS. A company that's valued at $19 billion being acquired for $33 billion, it seems to send up a lot of red flags, at least to a significant shareholder involved in this transaction. So this is where the soap opera drama, from my perspective, gives it that soap opera drama type of feel, because it's one thing after another, a twist here, a turn there, drama and dramatics here. It's just it's a lot to consume. It's a in all my years of reading and watching railroad news, any of the mergers, it's been a long time since I can remember this many twists and turns. I don't even remember if there were this many twists and turns in the breakup of Conrail between the NS and the CSX. It seemed like it was more straightforward. This one here, though, it's just almost made for reality TV, at least for us transportation nerds. Drama with all the twists and turns going on here. So as we move on, so the next portion I kind of want to cover here is, what does a merger mean to the North American rail network, and will it spur further consolidation? I think this is the point that the STB or the Department of Justice was worried about. If the CP-KCS merger is approved by the Surface Transportation Board, it will test one of my theories of truly efficient railroading. I'm almost positive that I didn't create this theory, but it's just something I'd like to say. It's going to probably, if the CP-KCS takes place, that it will truly test my efficient railroading theory. The less hands involved, the more efficient and profitable each car move will be. No, I didn't come up with the concept. This concept has been embedded in rail operations since the creation of railroading as we know it. But one question remains: will shippers see benefits such as lower rates and quicker equipment turnarounds in a single carrier system, moving raw materials and finished goods between Canada, the United States, and Mexico? The answer should be yes, but with a caveat. All goods, raw materials, and finished products don't move in a straight line throughout North America. For example, lumber loads picked up in Winnipeg by the Canadian Pacific will not necessarily move to a destination on the newly merged CPKCS Railway all the way to Mexico City. In fact, they may be destined for Georgia or Florida, which may require an interchange with Norfolk Southern or CSX to reach its destination. However, in theory, this should be a much more efficient move where the cars can stay on the CP until it reaches Meridian, Mississippi for a handoff to an eastern carrier. Why did I use this example? Well, because if it works out the way the CP and KCS hope it would, it could drive home the basis that a BNSF and S merger would enjoy similar synergies and would justify further consolidation among the Class 1. Now, these are just thoughts. Now, those thoughts were just a theory on future consolidation. Nobody said that's going to happen, but it's just the CPS KCS merger as it's currently structured. If it were to go to the Canadian Pacific, would drive home the single point, the single carrier rail efficiency theory. Now the only problem with that is like I said, at some point you do have to interchange. I don't see those same synergies with the Canadian National, which I'll kind of explain here in a little while. But that's just my thoughts and my theories on that. Looks like it's time for a commercial break. We'll take a short break here for our sponsors. Don't forget to click subscribe and like on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, Anchor, or whatever platform you're using to enjoy this podcast. I'll be right back.
Diverging Clear is sponsored by EME Rail Solutions LLC. We don't own rail cars, locomotives, or tracks, but if you do, we provide cutting-edge solutions to maximize your assets. Visit us at emerail.net to learn more. Diverging Clear is also brought to you by Three Kings Freight Brokerage LLC. Visit Three Kings Freight Brokerage LLC.com to learn more about their services.
From entering your home or business or eliminate them if they so happen to enter your friendly confines. Give them a call at area code 630-995-6849. Once again, that's 630-995-6849 for a free quote. On Target Pest Management provides services in the Chicagoland and Northwest Indiana area. Check them out. Also, you can check them out on Instagram at On Target Pest Management. And now, back to the show. And welcome back to the Diverging Clear Podcast, Episode 9, As the Railroads Merge. Also, don't forget to click the like and subscribe button on YouTube. Also, don't forget to check us out on Spotify, Apple, Google Play, or Anchor. For the audio version of this podcast, like I said, once again, thank you for tuning in. We're back to the show. So, on this next thing here, we'll try something a little different here, do a little visual there we go, messed that up. But coming up here, I'm about to show you bring up a map of what the Canadian Pacific KCS Railroad will look like. So now I'll try to explain a little bit of why these synergies kind of work out in favor of the Canadian Pacific, at least in my opinion. So as you look on this map here, the Canadian Pacific is primarily an east-west Canadian railroad, which of course crosses into North America through Minnesota and also through North Dakota. Now, in its current state, the Canadian Pacific only goes as far as Kansas City, and that's via the former IC&E, Iowa, Chicago, and Eastern Railroad that the Canadian Pacific acquired back in the early 2000s when they acquired the Dakota, Minnesota, and Eastern, the DM&E. Now, originally that railroad was the plan was for that railroad to um, reach the Powder River Basin out west to move coal from the Powder River Basin eastward, but that never came to fruition due to some pushback from locals. And then the economies of the coal production started dropping, coal usage started dropping. So I think that was one bullet that the Canadian Pacific dodged. Uh, when they acquired the DM&E and now spending that additional money to try to get to the Powder River Basin, as we see now, that was sort of a dying industry. But one of the good parts of that acquisition, in word or in reference to this merger, is that the IC&E gave the Canadian Pacific a route into Kansas City, which is now significant with this acquisition. One of the former CEOs of of Kansas City Southern, Mike Haverty, was speaking of when the CP was acquiring the DM&E. That the talks of the CP possibly acquiring KCS going back some 10 to 15 years was lightly discussed but never came to fruition. Probably just because the lack of cash or lack of financing that the Canadian Pacific didn't have to acquire the Canadian or the Kansas City Southern. So it never came to fruition. But I always tell people that when mergers take place, this stuff doesn't happen overnight. This is usually years and years of planning and strategizing and putting their chess pieces in the right place for it to come to fruition. So as you look on this map here, if you look towards where you see Davenport and Kansas City, that's the portion of the IC&E that reaches Kansas City for the Canadian Pacific. Now, as you look south of Kansas City, the Canadian Pacific doesn't own or have even trackage rights down anywhere south of Kansas City. Even with them moving east, they they don't go anywhere south in regards to serving any other portions of the country. Now, with the Kansas City Southern, as you can see, they will reach that Gulf Coast and all the way down to Veracruz, Mexico. And this is why I believe this would be more of a competitive merger or something that the STB would even consider as a more friendly competition creating merger than with the Canadian National, because now you have another player coming into the Gulf Coast along with the railroads that currently operate down there, which would be Canadian National, Norfolk Southern, CSX. I believe the UP even dabbles around there. I'm drawing a blank on that, but it would add another competitor into that crucial, as we call it, chemical coast region between New Orleans, Baton Rouge, Shreveport, Houston, Beaumont. That's sort of called what the area that's considered kind of the chemical coast because all the petrochemical plants and facilities along that way. So just from a geographic, standpoint, looking at this map, this looks like a very favorable and reasonable acquisition for the Canadian Pacific. As you can see, you will provide a single point, a single carrier route between all the way from Mexico all the way to Canada, to major destinations in Canada. So, and just in my opinion, I believe that this will be very favorable for rail competition and very favorable for shippers and also very favorable for shareholders because this looks like this has the potential to create some very favorable trade and transportation logistics opportunities for everyone involved in this. So this is just one look at on the Canadian Pacific side of things. The next map I'm going to show you is the current CN map and what they would look like if they were to acquire the the Kansas City Southern. Now, what you're going to notice is a lot of overlap. I'm gonna go ahead and bring that up now. So I'm going to rely on you to have a little bit of memory here. So this is the current CN network. As you can see, they don't go as far west as they go as Omaha and Sioux City. A lot of the routes here are there. There's competitive, a lot of competition in the particular areas north of Chicago with the Canadian Pacific and the Canadian National. Now, this is where it gets interesting. Once you get south of St. Louis, you start to see um, where the CN is a pretty dominant force in North America. They are the essential north south route of transportation in North America. At one time, the north south route was seen in the Illinois Central days as a not being able to compete with the east west routes of the major class ones. But if you look here, a lot of the especially once you get south of Memphis, a lot of the lines that Canadian National currently has overlap with some of the routes that the Kansas City Southern have, which is the big red flag. Part of the reason why the Department of Justice intervened or put their statement out concerning the anti-competitive nature of a Canadian National acquisition of Kansas City Southern, in particular in that chemical coast area, that Gulf Coast petrochemical area with Baton Rouge, New Orleans, Mobile. That would put literally where the KCS and the CN are the dominant carriers down there. It would essentially eliminate it down to one carrier in that primary district. Um, so the anti-competitiveness comes into play once you more so get to the Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi area is where the anti-competitiveness really picks up if the Canadian National were to acquire the KCS. So the area of emphasis, like I said, is that area south of Memphis is where the Canadian National is going to have a hard time disproving that this will not create a anti-competitive environment for rail traffic in that area. So in closing, my closing point is that this is going to get a lot more murkier and just I guess I would just say for the um, there's going to be a lot more drama before everything is said and done with this proposal. If the CN, if the KCS board votes to terminate the move with the Canadian Pacific and jump on board with the CN's proposal, which they would because of the money aspect of it, that premium that the Canadian National is willing to pay. That's the only thing that makes it favorable is cash in hand. However, from a sustainability of that cash and that acquisition, what value is that bringing to the Canadian National shareholders, which also has to play account. At the end of the day, this all comes down to money. And will that money, that premium spent, be able to be returned in ways of generating additional revenue, driving stockholder value higher? Those are the things that has to come into play. The most sensible acquisition partner for the KCS is the Canadian Pacific. And this is no bias towards Canadian National or favorite. I have no contacts and no legal reason to pick one railroad over the other. If I was working for the STB, that would be my recommendation. But I'm not working for the STB. But the fact of the matter is what makes sense for a transportation network in North America will be for the Canadian Pacific if this is going to go through for the Canadian Pacific to acquire for some of the reasons that I outlined. the Canadian National seems to aspect of it seems to eliminate an essential carrier in a very important region of North America. Whereas the CP acquisition of KCS would add it would seem to bring another carrier. It essentially wouldn't eliminate a rail carrier down there. It would allow one rail carrier to expand its reach in a much more efficient way. At least that's my perspective on it. It looks like it would be a much more reliable, sustainable way for growth and a healthy and successful way to drive more synergies and linking these three major trade partners markets in Canada, the U.S., and Mexico. So just as I said, just in my opinion, uh, and studying and looking at it from a pure logistics and transportation and revenue standpoint, the CP makes more sense than the Canadian National. The Canadian National, down to me, is the redundancy that it would create down in the Gulf Coast area. That's one of the major routes. Now, the CN does have some better routes north of the Gulf Coast, but in the Gulf Coast, you eliminate a crucial player in an area that you can't. That's strategically important, not only to that region, but to the entire nation of having goods and product and move in and out of the Gulf Coast. Now, one thing that I failed to mention, but I want to make sure I mention this in the closing, is with the shutdown of the Keystone Pipeline, the construction permit being pulled, the opportunity this provides for Canadian Pacific, and probably why a lot of the shippers and everything support it, is now you could actually move crude oil from Western Canada to the Gulf Coast for export via one rail carrier. So that's one thing that to me would be a huge advantage. While it can change from administration to administration, Keystone on, Keystone off, Keystone on, Keystone off. So instead of playing that game of we're gonna do it, no, next administration, no. Yes, we're gonna do it, next administration, no. So what this would do would stabilize the consistent flow of oil through CBR crude by rail from Canada to the Gulf Coast for export. That's a huge advantage that I haven't seen too many people talk about openly, but that would be one of the big advantages for Canadian Pacific to acquire the KCS. Now, the Canadian National could also do the same, but they wouldn't be able to reach down to the areas of Houston, where the big export terminals are on the Gulf Coast. The refineries also is another destination for this heavy crude that could move out of Canada. So that's one thing that we can look at all the other synergies, but that's one that I don't think is being mentioned, and maybe for numerous reasons, including the climate change push. People may not want to mention that as openly because there may be pushback from environmentalists of moving the heavy crude. You stopped in the pipeline, but now you put it on the train type of deal. So I don't want to spoil if that's what they're trying to do, but to me, it makes sense that the KCS would be portion would be an important link in that supply chain if that in fact is what would take place if Canadian Pacific acquired it. So those are my thoughts on this KCS CP, KCS CN, Erica Kane, Jackson Montgomery marriage that's trying to be consummated here. It's going to be interesting. I don't think anything this is the fight for the fact that the CP and the Canadian Pacific both are fighting for the KCS. I think either way it goes, it's going to have heavy consequences on whoever acquires it. If the CN were able to get through the regulatory process and get approved for the acquisition, only way I think it would work would be through there would be heavy stipulations put on the transaction. For example, certain areas down in once again, I always talk about the Gulf Coast would have to probably either be shed or spun off to other railroads or heavy trackage rights, or would have to be spun off if the Canadian National were to acquire this. Now, people would say, well, that's no big deal because they get that interest to other markets, but I think it would be so many repercussions and so many concessions that would have to be made, or that would be probably put in a merger transaction or a merger approval, I just don't think it would stand to give the CN any benefits. So I mean, I list a lot of the negatives. There are some synergies that do work, but just to me, the more favorable candidate or the more favorable pursuer in this for everyone, to me, is the Canadian Pacific. We'll see how it plays out. We'll see if the KCS actually terminates the merger agreement with the CP, with the Canadian Pacific, as it seems that they're going to do. But I know it's up to the KCS board to decide whether or not they're going to terminate that. There's been rumblings that they have, or they agreed to. So this is going to get messy. This is going to get messy, and I think the worst case scenario is that nobody gets it, and KCS stays as a standalone railroad. If that happens, that won't necessarily be bad for KCS, but it would be bad for anybody else in the future that would try to acquire the KCS. So this is going to be interesting. This is going to be some type of unprecedented decision, whatever decision is made. And then we'll see if this is going to spark the what would be considered what could essentially be the final round of mergers and acquisitions between major railroads in North America. So we'll stay tuned to that, see what happens, and that's all I got for you on As the Railroads Merge. If I had some dramatic soap opera music, I would play it, but due to copyright laws, I couldn't include that in this. So you just have to use your imagination for that. So that's my episode for today. I just want to say thank you for tuning in to the Diverging Clear Podcast, episode 9, As the Railroads Merge. Don't forget to click that subscribe and like button on YouTube. And if you're listening to the audio version on Spotify, Apple, Google Play, or Anchor, don't forget to subscribe to that also. You can also send comments or feedback to the Diverging Clear Podcast at gmail.com. That's Diverging Clear Podcast, all one word, at gmail.com. Also, don't forget to follow us on Twitter at Diverging Clear 1, the number 1, and on Instagram at Diverging_Clear_Podcast, and on Facebook. I want to say thank you again for tuning in for episode 9, As the Railroads Merge. I'm almost 100% positive we will have a follow-up episode onto this to give an update. I'll probably wait a month or two since the news stories are coming quicker than I can stand to even keep up with. We'll provide another update as some more significant moves and announcements are made. Just want to say thank you again for tuning in. Have a good day and stay safe out there.